The convoy was supposed to be untouchable. 17 vehicles, 42 private contractors, satellite overwatch, and enough encrypted communications gear to run a small war. Marcus Delacroix didn't do anything without 3 layers of redundancy, and his security chief had promised him the route through northern Afghanistan was clean. The billionaire sat in the third vehicle, reviewing acquisition documents on a tablet while the Hindu Kush mountains scrolled past his bulletproof window. He'd made his fortune in rare earth minerals, and the meeting in Kabul was worth $800 million. The convoy moved at exactly 53 kilometers per hour, maintaining perfect spacing, following the route his intelligence team had verified twice. Nobody noticed the shepherd on the hillside 2 kilometers out, or the way he casually adjusted his vest before walking away from his flock. Nobody saw the cell phone signal that pulsed once, then went dark. The first RPG hit the lead vehicle at 13:47 hours, turning 2 tons of armored steel into a fireball that sent black smoke curling into the crystalline mountain air. The convoy stopped. That was the mistake. Marcus's security chief, a former Delta operator named Voss, was already screaming into his radio, calling for immediate exfiltration, but the words died in his throat when he saw the tree line erupt with muzzle flashes. They'd driven straight into a kill box, and whoever designed it understood exactly how private military contractors thought. The second vehicle exploded, then the fifth. The contractors returned fire, their training evident in the controlled bursts, but they were shooting at shadows while rockets came from positions their intelligence had marked as clear. Marcus found himself on the floor of his vehicle, his driver slumped against the wheel with blood spreading across his tactical vest. Voss was pulling him toward the rear door, talking about displacement and rally points, using words that meant nothing because there was nowhere to go. The mountains had become a trap, and the kill box was tightening. Somewhere overhead, a satellite was watching them die in real time. Somewhere in Kabul, people who'd promised security were making phone calls that wouldn't matter. Marcus pressed his hands against the vehicle floor, feeling the impacts vibrate through the armor plating, and understood with perfect clarity that his billions meant absolutely nothing here. The radio chatter had become frantic, multiple voices overlapping, calling for air support that wasn't coming, for quick reaction forces that were too far away. Voss fired through a gun port, his face expressionless, professional even now. He'd been in bad situations before. This was worse. They had maybe 12 minutes before the enemy closed the distance and finished what the rockets had started. The sky above the mountains was empty, blue, and indifferent, and Marcus Delacroix began counting his remaining heartbeats in the silence between explosions. That's when they heard it, low, coming from the south. A sound like tearing metal, like industrial machinery grinding against the sky itself. Voss's head snapped up, and for the first time since the ambush began, something changed in his expression. The A-10 Thunderbolt came in at 400 feet, and anyone who'd served in a real war recognized that profile instantly. The nose pointed slightly downward like a predator's snout, the engines mounted high on the fuselage, and beneath the cockpit, the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon that gave the aircraft its only real purpose. It wasn't fast. It wasn't pretty. It looked like something designed in a basement by engineers who cared about one thing, keeping soldiers alive. The pilot didn't announce her presence with radio formalities. She'd been monitoring the frequency, heard the panic in Voss's voice, understood the tactical picture without needing it explained. Call sign Gravedigger 7. She'd been running a patrol 50 miles south when the convoy's distress call cut through the usual chatter, and she'd turned north without waiting for authorization, because some decisions you make with your gut. The insurgents saw the A-10 and immediately changed their tactics, pulling back from their assault positions, trying to blend with the terrain. They'd fought Americans before. They knew what that particular aircraft meant. Gravedigger 7 rolled slightly, her eyes tracking the tree line, seeing the muzzle flashes, the rocket positions, the vehicles already burning. She clicked her radio once. "Convoy, what's your status?" Voss's voice came back, tight with controlled fear. "We've got 18 personnel still combat effective, taking fire from multiple positions, northwest and east tree lines. We need immediate close air support. Copy. Stay low. This gets loud. She armed the GAU-8 and dropped another 100 feet, low enough that Marcus could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy, could see the aircraft's weathered paint and the kill markings someone had stenciled near the nose. Low enough that the A-10's shadow raced across the burning convoy like a promise. Then Gravedigger 7 opened fire and the world became noise. The GAU-8 fires at 65 rounds per second, and each round is the size of a milk bottle. The sound isn't like a machine gun. It's deeper, a mechanical bellow that vibrates in your chest, and the effect on human targets is something training manuals describe with clinical precision, while veterans just shake their heads. The northwest tree line disintegrated, not metaphorically. The 30-millimeter rounds shredded trees, turned cover into splinters, sent insurgents who'd been confident 30 seconds ago scrambling for positions that no longer existed. Gravedigger 7's gun run lasted 4 seconds. When she pulled up, that entire section of mountainside looked like it had been processed through an industrial shredder. She banked hard, already lining up for the second pass. In the convoy, Voss was pulling Marcus toward better cover, but the Billionaire had stopped moving. He was watching the A-10 carve figure eights above them, watching the pilot work with the kind of precision that comes from doing something 1,000 times until it becomes muscle memory. The eastern positions opened fire on the aircraft, tracers arcing up toward the Thunderbolt, and Marcus felt his chest tighten because those rounds were going to hit, were going to bring the plane down, except they didn't. Gravedigger 7 flew through the ground fire like it was rain, the A-10's titanium bathtub protecting her from everything except direct hits, and she toggled her weapons system to rockets. 2 Hydra pods rippled off, white smoke trails corkscrewing toward the eastern ridge, and the insurgent positions vanished in overlapping fireballs that sent rock fragments tumbling down the mountainside. "East side's clear," she reported, her voice carrying that flat, professional tone pilots use when they're doing something that would terrify normal people. "I've got movement in the southern valley, looks like a technical with a mounted gun. Engaging." Voss watched her drop even lower, following the terrain, and he recognized the flying style. This wasn't someone following a playbook. This was someone who'd grown up in an A-10, who understood the aircraft's capabilities the way a musician understands their instrument. The technical never had a chance. Gravedigger 7 came in from an angle that put the sun behind her, and by the time the gunner saw the A-10, it was already too late. The GAU-8 spoke again, and the technical turned into scrap metal, the mounted gun twisted into unrecognizable shapes, the insurgents who'd been firing it simply gone. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. The attack had lasted maybe 90 seconds, and in that time the entire tactical situation had reversed. The kill box had become a graveyard, and the A-10 was still circling, still hunting, the pilot's voice calm on the radio as she coordinated with Voss about potential secondary positions. "I've got about 8 minutes of station time," Gravedigger 7 said. "Your quick reaction force is 23 minutes out. I can keep the area suppressed until they arrive, but you need to consolidate your personnel and prepare for movement." Voss looked at the burning vehicles, at the contractors who were still alive because a single pilot had decided to turn north. "Understood. Gravedigger 7, what's your name?" There was a pause, brief. Then, "Does it matter?" "Yeah," Voss said. "It does." The pilot didn't answer immediately, and Marcus found himself leaning closer to the radio, wanting to hear the voice that belonged to whoever had just saved his life. When she spoke again, something had shifted in her tone, still professional but personal now. "Nix. Call sign Gravedigger 7, actual name is Nix Volkov." Voss nodded even though she couldn't see him. "Nix, thank you. Save it for the after-action report. I've got possible movement in the northern sector." She rolled again, that distinctive A-10 profile silhouetted against the mountains, and Marcus watched her work. The contractors were regrouping, establishing a defensive perimeter, treating wounded, following Voss's orders with the efficiency of people who knew they'd just been pulled from the edge. But Marcus wasn't looking at them. He was watching the A-10 patrol the sky above them, watching the way the pilot anticipated threats, positioned herself between the convoy and any possible attack vector. It was protection in its purest form, and it came from someone he'd never met, someone who owed him nothing, someone who'd risked her life because that's what the mission required. The quick reaction force arrived exactly when Nick said they would, 3 Blackhawks dropping into a defensive formation while the A-10 maintained overwatch. Voss coordinated the extraction, getting Marcus and the surviving contractors loaded while Nick circled above, her voice a constant presence on the radio, calling out clear sectors, confirming flight paths, making sure nothing else went wrong. When the Blackhawks lifted off, Marcus looked down at the convoy. 7 vehicles destroyed, 14 personnel killed. It should have been everyone. The flight back to Kabul took 40 minutes, and through the window Marcus could see the keeping pace, staying with them until they were safely in friendly airspace. Only then did Nix's voice come back on the radio, directed at the Blackhawk formation. "You're clear from here. Gravedigger 7 returning to station." The lead Blackhawk pilot responded, "Copy that, Gravedigger. Good work up there. Just doing the job." The A-10 peeled away, heading south, and Marcus watched it disappear into the distance. When they landed at Bagram, Voss was already on his phone, making calls, starting the process of figuring out how his intelligence had failed so catastrophically. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the failure. He was thinking about the sound of that GAU-8, about the way Nix had flown through ground fire like it was nothing, about the fact that his entire security apparatus had collapsed in minutes, while a single pilot had held the line. He found Voss 3 hours later in the operations center, surrounded by maps and incident reports. The security chief looked 10 years older. "I need her personnel file," Marcus said. Voss glanced up. "Who's?" "Nix Volkov, the pilot." Voss's expression shifted, something guarded moving behind his eyes. "Why?" "Because I want to know who she is." The security chief was quiet for a moment, then pulled up a file on his laptop, turned the screen toward Marcus. The photograph showed a woman in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, gray eyes that looked directly at the camera with the kind of gaze that didn't flinch. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, attractive in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with competence. The file was heavily redacted, but what remained told a story. Nix Volkov, 12 years service. A-10 pilot specializing in close air support. Multiple deployments. Citations for valor that were classified, and something else buried in the notes, a reference to a previous incident that had resulted in her transfer to a patrol route that kept her away from major operations. Marcus read it twice, then looked at Voss. "She's being sidelined." "That's not our concern," Voss said carefully. "She saved our lives, that makes it my concern." The security chief closed the laptop. "Mr. Delacroix, military politics are complicated. Whatever happened in her past, it's above your pay grade and definitely above mine." Marcus thought about the way Nix had flown, the precision, the absolute confidence in her abilities. Whatever she'd done to end up on patrol duty in the middle of nowhere, it hadn't affected her skills. If anything, she was the best pilot he'd never heard of. "Set up a meeting," he said. "I want to thank her personally." Voss shook his head. "That's not how this works. She's military, you're a civilian. There are protocols. Then find a way around the protocols." "Why? You want to pin a medal on her. She was doing her job." Marcus looked at the older man, this professional who'd built a career on security and still almost gotten him killed. "Her job was patrol. She came anyway. I want to know why." That question stayed with him for 3 days, through the flight back to London, through the debriefs with his lawyers and the difficult conversations with the families of the contractors who died. His company's stock price hadn't moved. The mineral deal was still pending. The world continued exactly as it had before the ambush, because to everyone else it was just another incident in a country full of incidents. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the A-10, about the pilot who turned north without authorization, who'd flown into a firefight to save people she didn't know. Voss called on the 4th day. "I made some inquiries, discreet ones, and Major Nix Volkov is stationed at Bagram. She's willing to meet with you, but it has to be off record. No publicity, no media, no corporate recognition. She was very clear about that." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. When? Tomorrow. 1400 hours. There's a cafe in the base's civilian sector. She'll be there. The next morning, Marcus flew back to Kabul, this time with a security detail that Voss had personally vetted, following a route that changed 3 times before they reached Bagram. The cafe was exactly what he expected. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a combat boot. Nix was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a flight suit with her name tape and rank insignia. In person, she was smaller than he'd imagined, maybe 5'7", with a build that suggested she spent more time in cockpits than gyms. But her eyes were exactly like the photograph, gray and direct, and when she looked at him, he felt the weight of her assessment. He sat down across from her, suddenly unsure what to say. She saved him the trouble. "You didn't need to come back," Nix said. Her voice was the same one from the radio, flat and professional, but there was something underneath it now, a wariness that hadn't been there when she was flying. "I wanted to thank you," Marcus said. "You did, over the radio, that was sufficient." "It wasn't." She studied him for a moment, then glanced around the cafe. A few other personnel, nobody paying attention. When she looked back, something had softened slightly in her expression. "You're here because you want to understand why I came. Why I didn't wait for authorization." "Yes." Nix picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down with the kind of precision that suggested every movement was calculated. "Do you know what the A-10's primary mission is, Mr. Delacroix? Close air support. Protecting ground forces, keeping soldiers alive. That's not just the mission, that's the only thing that matters." She leaned forward slightly. "I heard your convoy's distress call. I heard the panic. I knew what was happening and I knew I could help, so I turned north. It's not complicated. You violated protocol." "I violated procedures. There's a difference." Marcus felt like he was missing something important. "What difference?" Nix was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence Marcus saw something in her expression, a weight that had nothing to do with the ambush and everything to do with whatever had put her on that patrol route in the first place. 4 years ago, I was flying close air support for a special forces team in Helmand province. They were pinned down, taking casualties, calling for immediate air. I had ordnance, I had fuel, I had a clear shot, but command wanted me to wait for additional reconnaissance. They wanted confirmation of enemy positions, wanted to make sure we weren't hitting civilians. Her voice remained flat, but her eyes had changed, gone somewhere darker. I waited, followed orders. 90 seconds later, the team was overrun. 6 operators killed because I hesitated. Marcus felt his chest tight. "That wasn't your fault. Tell that to the families. Tell that to the pilots who now fly with my reputation hanging over them." She picked up her coffee again, and her hands were completely steady. "After that, I developed a problem with authority, specifically with authority that prioritizes procedure over lives. So when I heard your convoy, I didn't ask permission. I just went. And if command wants to court-martial me for it, that's fine. At least nobody died while I was following orders." The cafe had gone quiet around them, or maybe Marcus had just stopped hearing anything except her voice. This woman who'd saved his life had done it knowing it might end her career, had made that calculation in the seconds it took to turn her aircraft north, and she didn't seem interested in recognition or gratitude or anything except the knowledge that she'd done what needed doing. "They can't court-martial you," Marcus said. "They can do whatever they want. I'm not your concern, Mr. Delacroix. You're alive, that's what matters." She stood up and Marcus realized the meeting was over. "Nix, wait." She paused, looking down at him with those gray eyes that had tracked insurgents from 400 feet up, that had assessed the tactical picture in seconds while he'd been counting heartbeats on a convoy floor. "What? Is there anything I can do to help?" "No. I have resources, connections." I don't need a billionaire playing hero," Nix said, and there was no heat in it, just a statement of fact. "I need the Air Force to remember that the A-10 exists to save lives, not to follow perfect procedure. But that's not something money fixes." She walked toward the door and Marcus watched her go, this pilot who'd become a ghost in her own service because she'd valued lives over orders. He should have let her leave. Should have gone back to London, back to his mineral deals and acquisition documents. should have filed the whole experience away as a story to tell at dinner parties. He didn't. Marcus spent the next week at Bagram, talking to people who wouldn't normally talk to him, learning things about military culture that his security consultants had never explained. He learned that Nix was legendary among ground forces, that soldiers requested her specifically for close air support, because she flew with a precision that bordered on supernatural. He learned that she'd been passed over for promotion 3 times, that her commanding officers appreciated her skills but didn't trust her judgment, that she'd essentially been exiled to patrol routes where her tendency to make unauthorized decisions wouldn't cause problems. He learned that the A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and protective of their own, and that Nix had a reputation for being difficult, uncompromising, and absolutely unwilling to let people die while she followed protocol. And he learned through careful conversation with a maintenance chief who'd served with her about the call sign. Gravedigger, the chief said, wiping hydraulic fluid from his hands. She got that after Helmand. Some pilots would have broken under that guilt. She just got quieter, started flying like every mission was personal. Why Gravedigger? Marcus asked. The chief looked at him like he was stupid. Because every time she flies, she's digging graves for the enemy so our people can go home. That's what the A-10 does, Mr. Delacroix. It kills things that need killing, and it protects people who need protecting. And Nix is the best at it that I've ever seen. Marcus flew back to London with a tablet full of notes and a plan that Voss told him was insane. You want to do what? The security chief said. I want to create a civilian contract position that would allow the Air Force to loan out experienced A-10 pilots for private security operations in high-risk areas. Fully funded, completely legal, with provisions that give the pilots operational autonomy. Voss stared at him. That's not how the military works. It is if you structure it correctly. The Air Force gets to keep experienced pilots in active status while also generating revenue from civilian contracts. The pilots get to do the work they're trained for without political interference, and companies like mine get access to the best close air support in the world. And you think Nix would accept this? I think she'd accept anything that lets her keep flying and saving lives without having to follow orders that get people killed. Voss was quiet for a long moment. You're doing this because you feel guilty. I'm doing this because I watched a pilot risk everything to save people she didn't know, and then I watched her service forget about her. If I can fix that, I will. It took 6 months. 6 months of negotiations with Pentagon officials, of legal frameworks and liability structures, of convincing people that this wasn't an attempt to privatize military operations, but rather a way to utilize experienced personnel more efficiently. 6 months of resistance from officers who didn't trust civilian oversight, and support from soldiers who'd served with A-10 pilots and understood their value. Marcus used every connection, called in favors from politicians he'd funded, leveraged his company's defense contracts to create pressure where it was needed. And through it all, he didn't contact Nix. Didn't call, didn't write, didn't send messages through intermediaries. Whatever he was building, it needed to stand on its own merit, needed to be something real rather than a billionaire's vanity project. The program was approved in March. They called it the Tactical Aviation Support Initiative because military programs needed boring names that disguised their actual purpose. The structure was simple. Experienced A-10 pilots could volunteer for temporary assignment to civilian security contracts, maintaining their military status while operating under rules of engagement that prioritized ground force protection over procedure. The pilots retained complete tactical authority. The Air Force got to keep experienced personnel who might otherwise leave the service, and companies operating in high-risk areas got access to the kind of close air support that could turn a kill box into a survival story. Nix's name was first on the volunteer list. Marcus found out through Voss, who'd been monitoring the program's initial implementation. The security chief pulled up the roster on his laptop, pointed at the top entry. She signed up the day the program was announced. Didn't even wait for her commanding officer's approval. Did she know I was behind it? Marcus asked. Nobody knows you're behind it. That was the whole point of the anonymous funding structure. Marcus looked at Nix's name on the screen, at the pilot who'd saved his life and then walked away without asking for anything, who'd volunteered for a program that would let her do the one thing she cared about without interference. He thought about calling her, about explaining what he'd built and why. He didn't. Some debts couldn't be paid directly. Some gratitude needed to exist in the space between people, acknowledged but unspoken. 3 months later, a mining convoy in the Democratic Republic of Congo came under attack from a militia group that had been quiet for 6 months. The security team called for air support, expecting the usual delays, the usual political clearances, the usual hesitation from commanders who didn't want international incidents. Instead, they got Gravedigger 7. Nix came in low over the jungle, her A-10 painted in the same weathered gray that had shadowed Marcus's convoy in Afghanistan, and she cleared the ambush in 4 minutes. The mining company's CEO, a Norwegian named Peterson who'd never heard of Marcus Delacroix, sent a company-wide email praising the new aviation support program, and specifically mentioning the pilot who'd saved his personnel with almost supernatural precision. The email went viral in private security circles. Within a month, 8 companies had requested the Tactical Aviation Support Initiative for their high-risk operations. Within 3 months, the program had expanded to include 6 pilots. By the end of the year, the A-10 community had gone from being the Air Force's forgotten stepchild to being the most requested asset in civilian security operations. And Nix flew mission after mission, racking up saves, building a reputation that transcended the Helmand incident, proving what she'd always known, that the A-10's mission wasn't about politics or procedure, but about keeping people alive when everything else had failed. Marcus tracked her career from a distance, reading the after-action reports that came through channels he'd established, watching her statistics accumulate. 47 missions in the first year. 0 friendly casualties. 83 confirmed enemy combatants neutralized, and a growing legend among ground forces that Gravedigger 7 was the call sign you wanted to hear when everything went wrong. He never contacted her, never sought recognition for creating the program. His company kept paying the funding, kept supporting the initiative, but his name never appeared in any official documentation. Voss asked him about it once late at night in Marcus's London office while they reviewed security protocols for a new acquisition in Uzbekistan. "Why don't you tell her? Why don't you let her know you built this for her?" Marcus looked out at the city lights at the comfortable distance between his world and the places where Nix flew. "Because that would make it about me, and it's not, it never was." "So what is it about?" "Debt," Marcus said quietly, "and respect. And making sure that what she did for me, what she does for everyone actually matters in a system that tried to forget her." Voss nodded slowly. "You know she's being considered for promotion. The program's success has changed how command sees her." "Good. They want to give her a desk job, strategic planning for the initiative. She'd be overseeing the whole program." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "She won't take it." "How do you know?" "Because Nix doesn't want to plan missions. She wants to fly them." The security chief was quiet for a moment. "What if she doesn't have a choice? What if command insists?" Marcus turned from the window. "Then I'll make a phone call, because the whole point of this program is to let pilots like her do what they do best without interference. If the Air Force tries to ground her, they've missed the entire point." He didn't need to make the call. Nix turned down the promotion herself, in a meeting with her commanding officer that became legendary in A-10 circles. The exact words were never confirmed, but the story that circulated was that she'd looked at the colonel offering her the desk position and said, "Sir, with respect, you can promote me or you can keep me flying. You can't do both. And if you make me choose, I'll be flying civilian security missions within a week because at least they understand what the A-10 is for." The colonel, who'd reviewed her mission record and understood exactly what the Air Force would lose if she left, withdrew the promotion offer. Nix stayed in the cockpit. The program continued to grow, and Marcus Delacroix went back to his mineral acquisitions and billion-dollar deals, satisfied that he'd paid his debt the only way that mattered, by creating space for excellence to exist without apology. 2 years after the ambush, Marcus returned to Afghanistan for another meeting, this time with better intelligence and a security detail that included former operators from 6 different Special Forces units. Voss had learned from the first failure, had built redundancies into redundancies, had made sure that nothing like the convoy ambush could happen again. The meeting went perfectly. The mineral rights were secured. The trip home was scheduled for the following morning. And late that night, sitting in a secured compound in Kabul, Marcus received a message through the aviation support program's encrypted channel. It was from Nix, short, direct, exactly like her. Heard you were in country. Coffee tomorrow, 800, same cafe, don't send security, come alone. Marcus showed the message to Voss, who immediately shook his head. Absolutely not, you don't go anywhere alone. She saved my life. Which is why I don't want you risking it by ignoring basic security protocols. Marcus looked at his security chief, this man who'd built a career on protection, who'd failed once and would never forgive himself. If Nix wanted me dead, she's had 2 years and 100 opportunities. I'm going. He went alone, walking through Bagram's morning crowds, and found Nix at the same corner table, wearing the same flight suit, looking exactly like she had 2 years ago except for something different in her eyes, something lighter. She stood when he approached, and for a moment they just looked at each other, this billionaire and this pilot, 2 people whose lives had intersected in violence and diverged into different kinds of purpose. Mr. Delacroix, Nix said. Nix, thank you for coming. Marcus sat down across from her. Thank you for the invitation. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again. She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look younger, less haunted. I didn't for a long time. But then I started hearing things about a program that appeared from nowhere, about funding that came from sources nobody could trace, about a structure that seemed designed specifically to let A-10 pilots do their jobs without command interference. Marcus kept his expression neutral. Sounds like a good program. It is. It's given me back something I thought I'd lost. She leaned forward slightly. It's also clearly your work. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying. I'm just not confirming. Nix laughed, a sound that didn't quite match her call sign but suited her perfectly. Okay, then let me say this hypothetically. If someone built that program because they felt grateful, because they saw something broken and decided to fix it, I'd want them to know it mattered, that it didn't just change my career. It changed how I think about what I do. Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Hypothetically, that person would be glad to hear it. They talked for an hour about flying and business, about the missions Nix had flown and the deals Marcus had closed, about the strange intersection of their worlds. And gradually, Marcus understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. Nix hadn't asked him here to say thank you. She'd asked him here to show him that she was okay, that the weight she'd carried from Helmand was still there but no longer crushing her, that she'd found a way to live with the past while building something better in the present. And they finally stood to leave. Nix extended her hand. Marcus shook it, feeling the calluses from years of flying, the strength that came from wrestling an A-10 through combat maneuvers. If you're ever in trouble again, she said, call sign Gravedigger 7 monitors the same frequencies. I'll come running. I know, Marcus said. That's why I'll try very hard not to need you. Appreciate it, but if you do, you'll be there, I know. She nodded once, then walked toward the door, pausing just before she left. Marcus? It was the first time she'd used his first name. Yeah. Whatever you build next, make sure it's worth protecting, because there are people like me out here who'll bleed to keep it safe. Make it count. Then she was gone, and Marcus stood in the cafe, thinking about worth and purpose and the responsibility that came with being saved. He flew home that afternoon, and on the flight he drafted plans for a foundation focused on supporting veterans who'd been sidelined by their own services, who had skills and dedication, but had been caught in political machinery that didn't value them correctly. He thought Nix might approve. The program expanded over the next 3 years, adding more pilots, more aircraft types, more opportunities for experienced personnel to do the work they'd trained for without political interference. The A-10 community, once threatened with retirement and obsolescence, found new purpose in civilian security operations. and Gravedigger 7 became a call sign that ground forces in 17 countries recognized as synonymous with precision, protection, and a pilot who'd rather fight command than let people die. Marcus never told anyone he'd created the program. Voss knew. A few Pentagon officials suspected. But in the world that mattered, the world where pilots flew and soldiers survived, it didn't matter who'd built the structure. What mattered was that it worked. 5 years after the ambush, Marcus received another message. This time it came through official channels from the Air Force Chief of Staff. Major Nix Volkov had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions in Somalia, where she'd kept a surrounded peacekeeping force alive for 3 hours until extraction arrived. The ceremony was scheduled for the Pentagon. Press would be present. The Air Force wanted to showcase the Tactical Aviation Support Initiative as an example of innovative military-civilian cooperation. Marcus was invited to attend. He considered declining. The whole point had been anonymity, had been creating something that existed independent of his ego or his need for recognition. But then he thought about Nix, about the pilot who'd flown through ground fire to save strangers, who deserved to have people witness her receiving acknowledgement she'd earned years ago. He went. The ceremony was everything military ceremonies were: formal, precise, heavy with tradition. Nix stood at attention in her dress uniform while a general read citations that described her actions with the kind of clinical language that made heroism sound routine. Marcus watched from the audience, seated among Pentagon officials and defense contractors, and when they pinned the medal to Nix's uniform, he saw something in her expression that hadn't been there in that cafe years ago. Pride. Not in the medal itself, but in what it represented. Validation that her approach, her refusal to choose procedure over lives, had been right all along. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Marcus stayed at the edges, watching Nix navigate conversations with senior officers who'd probably written efficiency reports about her need for better judgment and improved adherence to command structure. She handled them with the same precision she brought to flying, polite but not deferential, present but not absorbed. She found him an hour into the reception, appearing at his elbow with a glass of champagne she clearly had no intention of drinking. "You came," she said. "Wouldn't have missed it. Liar, you hate these things. I can see it on your face." Marcus smiled. "Maybe, but I wanted to see you get recognized properly." Nix looked at the medal on her uniform, then back at him. "This isn't the recognition that matters, you know that. What matters then? The 47 people who went home to their families because I was flying overhead. The fact that there are now 23 pilots doing what I do, keeping people alive without asking permission first. That's what matters." She paused, then added quietly, "The fact that someone understood what needed fixing and fixed it without needing credit. That matters too." Marcus met her eyes, those gray eyes that had tracked targets from 400 feet up, that had assessed impossible situations and made the right call anyway. "Hypothetically, don't," Nix interrupted, but she was smiling. "Don't hypothetical me. Just accept that I know and I'm grateful, and if you ever need anything, ever, you call. Same to you. I won't need anything. I have everything that matters." She gestured around the reception, at the officers and the ceremony and the formal recognition. "This is nice, but what you built, what someone built, that's real, that's legacy." The conversation was interrupted by a colonel who wanted to introduce Nix to a senator, and Marcus watched her get pulled back into the official celebration, watched her handle the attention with the same competence she brought to everything. He left before the reception ended, stepping out into the Washington twilight, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless since the ambush. The debt was paid, not because of the program, or the funding, or the opportunities he'd created, but because Nix had found her way back to the work that defined her, had transformed her reputation from cautionary tale to legend, had proven that the qualities that got her sidelined, her refusal to follow orders that would get people killed, were exactly the qualities that made her invaluable. Marcus flew back to London that night, and he never attended another ceremony related to the aviation support program. Voss kept him updated on the statistics, on the expanding roster of pilots, on the lives saved and operations secured. But Marcus's involvement remained invisible, a funding structure that worked through layers of anonymous donations and nonprofit organizations, supporting something he'd built and then released into the world to exist on its own merit. 10 years after the ambush, the Tactical Aviation Support Initiative had become a permanent fixture of international security operations. The A-10 community, once threatened with extinction, had found new purpose and new respect, and Nix Volkov, call sign Gravedigger 7, had flown 312 missions without a single friendly casualty, had trained a generation of pilots who understood that the aircraft's ugly profile and industrial sound existed for one purpose: keeping people alive when everything else had failed. Marcus read about her occasionally, in security briefings and after-action reports. She'd made colonel. She'd turned down another desk job. She'd become the face of close air support done right, the pilot that ground commanders requested by name. And somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, on a stretch of road where 7 vehicles still lay burned and rusting, there was a story that contractors told new personnel about the day a Billionaire's security failed, and a single A-10 came in low, flown by a pilot who decided that some debts were paid in action rather than gratitude, in protection rather than recognition, in the simple act of showing up when everyone else was too far away or too bound by procedure to help. The story always ended the same way, with the sound of that GAU-8 with the A-10's shadow racing across burning vehicles, with a call sign that meant someone was fighting to keep you alive. Gravedigger 7, still flying, still saving lives, still proving that the best security doesn't come from protocols or procedures or expensive equipment, but from people who understand that the mission matters more than the medals, that lives matter more than the orders, and that sometimes the only thing standing between survival and catastrophe is a pilot who's willing to turn north without asking permission.